So we talked about Holy Thursday. Let's talk now about Good Friday. Traditionally, the Good Friday service is celebrated at 3 in the afternoon because according to the Gospel of John, that's the hour when Jesus died. And it was also the hour when the lamb was sacrificed, the Passover lamb. And so there's this connection between the Exodus and the Passover, and Jesus, the new Exodus, and the new Passover. And the Good Friday service begins with a very beautiful ritual. It's one of my favorite gestures of the entire liturgical year, where the priest process forward and they lay prostrate before the altar for just a couple of seconds to pray. And it's the gesture that every priest does before he's ordained a priest. He lays prostrate, and it's a symbol of the death of Christ, where the priest enters into the death of Christ. And in the priest, all the faithful enter into the death of Christ with the hope of rising with him the next day on the Easter Vigil. So we begin with that, and then we enter directly into the liturgy of the Word. And in the liturgy of the Word, there's the great the song of the suffering servant from the prophet Isaiah, talking about this prophecy of how the Messiah will have to suffer and die in a very mysterious way. And then we read the Passion narrative from the Gospel of John. And there are only 2 times during the year when we read the Passion. The first is on Palm Sunday, so Passion Sunday. We read from one of the Synoptic Gospels, which this year is Matthew because we're in year A. And then Good Friday is always the Gospel from John, which is interesting. It's really the center of the Gospel. It's the center of our Christian life, the Passion of Jesus. But that part of the Gospel we read only twice a year. So it's a very important moment. It's a very long Gospel, but it's our way of remembering and participating and entering into that great mystery. And then after the Gospel, the priest gives a brief homily, hopefully brief. And then after the homily, there is what's called the universal prayer, the 10 prayers where the church prays for the entire world, and she prays also for herself. And because this is really the day of our redemption, the day of the atonement, where Jesus wins for us through his death our salvation. And so we have the opportunity to pray that all of humanity is brought into that great mystery and brought into that redemption. And then at the end of the Good Friday service, there is a communion service. There's no Mass. It's actually the only day of the entire year where there's no Mass celebrated, and because we're remembering the death of Jesus. But the faithful are allowed to receive Holy Communion. And before receiving Holy Communion, there's the veneration of the cross, where this is an ancient ritual that began really in the 4th century when St. Helena, she found the cross. And so Christians in Jerusalem began to venerate it, especially on Good Friday, where they would come up in procession and they would kiss the cross. And this ritual was then adopted by the Universal Church, especially when the Pope adopted it in the 7th century. It was something that was promulgated in the entire church. And so it's a way of showing our love for the cross. It's an ironic gesture because we're venerating a symbol of execution, but because of what Jesus did, we're not venerating just a piece of wood. We're venerating that wood which is won for us our salvation. And so at the end of the Good Friday service, we end in a very somber, a very sober way, and we go home to remember that Jesus now is dead. He's in the tomb, and this is the time of great silence, where the entire world is silent, waiting for the beginning of the Easter Vigil when we will commemorate the resurrection.